Here I have the steering kit assembly. I bought this kit off Trade Me for $279. Included in this kit is the 17-foot steering cable, the back gear assembly for the steering wheel. You get your nuts, bolts, and the back plate, and then also you have the steering wheel included in this kit. Over here is the center console where I'm going to be mounting the steering wheel. I've already cut out where the back plate is going to fit. Just did that by putting it wrong side up and then marking it out. And then what I did is use my router just to cut it out inside the lines. And also the hole is just a 55mm hole saw. Cut that right through, and the steering assembly will fit in there. It fits in perfectly. What I did is I cut all of this out before I did the fiberglass, so it is a little bit sticky, but it goes in quite alright. Then I pre-drilled the holes where the nuts and bolts will go through to the back part, which is the back gear assembly for the steering wheel. That will fit in the back of that back plate. I had to put some washers at the back just to space it out, because the wood I'm using is a lot thinner than I suppose the product was meant to be fastened to. Here I've got the 3 nuts and bolts to fasten this bracket to the center console. So easy enough, they just slide into the holes. And they have these lock nut washers that will go onto the back. So I'm just going ahead and install these 3 nuts and bolts and tighten them up. Make sure to get these in nice and tight, and that's not going anywhere. Once you have these 3 bolts just tapped into the back steering mechanism, you can then go ahead and tighten them up. Just be careful not to tighten them up too tight, because it is just the brass thread inside there, and doing them up too tightly might strip it. So just hand tight enough so it doesn't move, but not too tight so it strips. Put some Loctite on the bolts so you know that they won't come out in the future. So here we have the plastic cover that goes over the steering bracket. The only thing you want to do here is just line up your 2 holes, make sure they are nice and level, and then after that you can mark out your holes and put some screws into it. So how I do this bit for marking the holes, I just take a nail, make sure that it actually fits through the hole, and then what you do is just put it over your steering arm, line it up so that you are nice and level, and then what I do is just put the nail in the hole and take a hammer and give it a little tap and take that out. Just make sure it's still lined up and level, then put the nail into the other hole and give it another tap with a hammer, and after that you remove the cover and you have your 2 marks where you can now pre-drill for your screws. As with everything on a boat, be sure to use stainless steel screws. So it just has this little cover. You pop the cover off, and also got a washer and this little pin. Turn that up. It's got a little slit in there, so what you do is this fits right in there, and that goes into one of those slots, and it actually grips on the steering wheel. So we want to have it up, facing up that way. That slot's there, and we'll just line that slot up and slide it in. Perfect. And that turns your boat. Hop on the washer, hop on the little lock nut, and tie that on. Just enough, it comes loose, and there, that's what you want. There we go. Pop that little cover back on, and that's us done with the steering bit. The correct way to measure the length of steering cable that you would require for your boat would be as follows. You measure from the center of the steering, where the steering is sitting, to the side of your boat, and that comes to 1.1 meters. Then from the side of your boat you measure all the way to the back of your boat, and that is another 2.2 meters, comes out to 3.3 meters so far. Then from the side of your boat you measure to the center where the motor is going to be sitting, and that is another 1.1 meters. So what you do is you calculate that up and then put it into feet, and that's the length of steering cable that you would require for the boat. When you're installing the steering cable, always make sure that you install it to the starboard side of the boat. So when you're doing pre-drilling your cables, do it on the starboard side. I've already pre-drilled the hole for the steering cable to come out. It will run into that corner, and I'll have something to cover up in the end. So what I need to do at this stage is get a hole through there, and then run the cable up underneath the gunnel and all the way to the back. Drilled another hole at the back of the gunnel that will go into that little back space, and then out through there to where the motor sits. Right, now getting to the fun part, the cable, always make sure it's got two ends. This end is going to the back, this will fasten onto the motor, and this end will go into your little steering mechanism inside here. So first of all, feed it in from the bottom. Never ever bend this cable too much. Make sure that if there's any bends in it, it's a slight bend, it's nothing 90 degrees or anything, because that will just leave your cable jammed and you won't be able to turn your motor. So if it's a slight bend, that's okay, but nothing too much. Right, so I've the cable in. You just stick your cable into that hole in there, and then just start turning your steering wheel, and that would pull it in all the way. And it sort of runs in there, it goes along this gears and it comes out on this end. You just keep on pulling it in while turning the steering wheel, and until it is in that hole. I had to make a little cut out because to straighten this thing up so there's no major kinks or bends in this part. So that goes in, and once you got it lined up and you give it another tug, and you will hear it click into that position. As soon as you got that straightened up, give it a nice pull, and that would lock it in place. After you've done that, you've got this little clip, and that clip just pops in over there, and that keeps it from coming back out. So the next step would be to center your steering wheel. So you just calculate how many turns you've got on it. I've got 3 turns on it, so 1.5 would be center, so 1.5, that's one way, and then back to center, and then 1.5 back, and that's on the other side, so that's centered. So that's where that little pin at the back comes in real handy. If you don't get it quite center, you can shift it up to the other angle and then try and line it up that way. So I have it running down that hole. Always start from the far end, work your way back, as I just found it's really difficult trying to get the back piece through that hole if you don't put it in first. So always work from the back to the front, get your cable to your steering. So we'll stick this side in through the hole in there. Just leave that in there until we make that hole, so we can just pop it out straight through the hole instead of bringing it out and then trying to feed it back in. So I'll make another hole there, and that will just pop straight into where the motor needs to go. The next part, we were installing the outboard motor onto the boat. I did a time-lapse video on this, as it was a bit of a time-consuming process to get this motor onto the boat, and but it was fairly straightforward, nothing to it. We only winched up the motor in the shed and then backed in the boat, dropped the motor back onto the boat, and marked out the holes where we're going to fasten it to, drilled those out. We got some stainless steel threaded rods which we then cut and fastened it in with some stainless steel nuts as well, and that secured the motor on the boat. Nothing to it, fairly straightforward and easy process. All up, it took us about an hour and a half to get the motor installed. So as I said, it was a bit time consuming, but really straightforward. Now with the motor installed on the boat, I can drill the hole where the steering cable would run through. Now it's just a case of putting the steering cable through the hole that I've drilled and get it going out the back. Remember to put some grease into the hole that the steering arm will go into and onto the steering arm. This just makes it easier and slides in a lot easier this way. So I'm just hand tightening this bolt to secure it in place, and if you note on the other side it is barely through. So how we will fix this is by just centering up the steering wheel, and that brings it back out. On the other side, what we then do is the steering arm will just line up, straighten up the motor, line up the steering arm. It has this washer going up the top, and then that would just go into the steering cable. Doing this left-handed is a bit tough, filming and doing it at the same time. So that just slides into the steering cable. Then we have another washer and a lock nut that secures everything in place on the bottom. Last step would just be to fasten this up with a spanner, and then that's the steering completed. So just testing everything, turning the steering to the right, and the outboard moves to the right, and then turn it back to center. The outboard is centered, steering is centered, and turning the steering to the left, and then also the outboard then moves to the left.